Iran has enormous reach and power that most people are not aware of. They think of it as just yet another country in the Middle East, but it is a far greater power. Public executions are a normal part of life in Iran. Over 50,000 people have been taken into prison. And what happens to those 50,000 people now? Do they want that exerted on them by an outside force? Absolutely not. Israel is meddling. They want to sway it in the direction that there's a puppet that comes into power after the regimes fall.
All right, and welcome back to the Rice Report, everybody. Happy New Year again. First 3 weeks of the year have been quite a decade that we have gone through. So a lot of things happening right now. As you know, on this show, we try to take the approach of looking at things from all sides, and I think everyone should do that. If you are listening to puppeteers or cheerleaders or echo chambers that can continually root on bad things, you're being led in the wrong direction. Expand your thinking, expand your knowledge, expand your information base, and look at things from all sides so that you can be fully educated and know the difference between right and almost right, because almost right is where everyone gets trapped. And today we are joined with Zahra Amanpour. She is an entrepreneur, a mother, and a human rights activist, and has quite a story that I think that you will all be very interested in, because the topic of, I say Iran, but Iran, I'm trying to say that properly. My Chicago accent takes over at times. I still say Oregon instead of Oregon. But it is important to understand that there are multiple sides to a story. I put a post out on X last night talking about the way I feel when I hear that America is going to free another nation. It is a tricky thing to do. It is a very tricky thing to do, and Zahra is going to go through this pretty adeptly. But I want you to think in this capacity, and you should be thinking in this capacity. Forget who is president. Doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George Bush. Doesn't matter. Think of what would happen if military came into this country and took our leader. You would have multiple different types of reactions. There is not a statistical working out there that would prove that literally 100% of people in every nation think the same way. It is not that way. It is not that cut and dry. The world is a gray area, and the powers that be try to force us into black and white decisions. In this example, if a military were to come into America and take our president because our president, in their opinion, was oppressing the people of this country, they wanted to free us, half of the nation would be upset. We're going to edit that. We're going to edit that out. Half of the nation would be up in arms. The other half of the nation would be cheering wildly. So this is not different in any other country. There's no other country around the world synonymously where everyone unanimously feels the same way about U.S. intervention or any foreign intervention in their country. And Zahra, I hope that we can have a good conversation here today and walk through this, because I think that when someone reads your bio, they would assume that you have an opinion in one direction. But when they study a little bit about you, it's the exact opposite. And I think that that is a wholesale picture of the way that we should be discerning what is happening in our world today. So welcome, Zahra. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. That's the ultimate compliment for me. So thank you so much, Eric, and thank you for having me here today.
Absolutely, absolutely. Give us a quick picture of your story, a little bit of background on you, so that we can. I've heard it, but I want from your mouth to the audience ears. I would definitely want them to understand where you're coming from before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Iranian-American. My mother is American, born in Portland, raised all over America. Father Iranian. They went to Iran, and my mom lived in Iran for over a decade and had my older sister and I there. We fled Iran shortly after the first revolution in 1979, where my parents witnessed firsthand the atrocities of the Shah and what was happening in the country at that time, and what led to that revolution, and what led to the current regime coming to power, and sort of the dynamics that allowed that to happen. We fled the country because it wasn't safe. My mom is American, I shouldn't say was. My father drafted into the army, didn't want to participate in anything like that. So we fled the country and came to the United States. My parents have stayed extremely active. I am what you would say a child of the resistance. I have been raised with the resistance, been protesting my entire life, been trying to bring attention to the situation in Iran, the realities of the Iranian people, and the struggle for freedom that they have had under two consecutive dictatorships, my entire life. So that's the gist of my story. In 1988, my father went back to the Middle East to bring more attention to what was happening to political prisoners in Iran and become part of the struggle on the ground in Iran, and was killed by the Iranian regime in 1988. So this story is very personal to me. I have lost many colleagues, people that I love dearly to this struggle, and something that I hope I can help the world understand better.
Yeah, and just to kind of clear things up, in 1979, we call it a revolution. At the same time, it can be very easily viewed as an intelligence agency color revolution that was orchestrated by U.S. powers. An important book for anyone to read to understand foreign relations that the U.S. and China and many other superpowers around the world is absolutely one to read. It's called Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and there's an entire 2 chapters dedicated to Iran. And without reading that and understanding that, it's almost impossible to have a real solid opinion as to what we should do, which is what I really want to get into. Like, Iran has their own, I said it right. Iran has their own problems. America has their, it does take practice. It does. You know, 48 years of saying something wrong. I'm trying to get it right here today. We have our own problems. Iran has their own problems. Brazil has their own problems. Russia has their own problems. And yet we're the intervener all over the world. We are the interventionist, that we are just proclamating that everyone should be like us. Does Iran want to be like America? Now, preface this by saying, if you look at photos before 1979, beautiful place, amazing place, tremendous commerce, growing nation.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 2 sides. So let me answer your question directly, and then I'll go back into your second point. Iranians want something that a lot of Americans, we take for granted here, which is we want freedom and democracy. However this country is being run currently, we do have that. We have freedom and democracy, and that is something that the Iranian people are struggling for. Now, do they want that exerted on them by an outside force? Absolutely not. Do they want to be exactly the same as the United States? That's to be determined. They first have to get their freedom. They first have to get to a point where they can establish their own laws, their own governing laws, their own democracy, and then they can decide for themselves what that democracy looks like and how much it mirrors the United States, how much it mirrors other democracies around the world. But certainly the common thread there that we are all striving for, I think all humanity is striving for, is freedom. And that is something that the Iranian people are after and have been struggling for a very long time. To your point about 1979, yes, there was an economic and political coup in Iran in the 1950s that led to the 1979 revolution that overthrew the Shah. So yes, there was on the surface more prosperity and you could argue more rights for some Iranians. But the reason there was a revolution was because the Iranian people, there were still a lot of repression going on, and the Iranian people felt that that government needed to be overthrown, and they wanted, again, we're fighting for freedom and democracy, which unfortunately they were not able to obtain in 1979. So it has this regime made it even worse? Yes. Another 45 years of dictatorship, a theocracy, which is what we're dealing with now, there has crazy implications for the country, horrible implications for the country. But Iran has yet to have its moment in terms of prosperity and freedom.
Yeah, as do historically all theocracies, by the way. Every theocracy dating back 2,000 years, and you can even go back to Babylon, turns out wrong, right? So even Persia, ancient Iran, was a theocracy of paganism. So that is a tremendous point to bring up, that this is truly a theocracy. So moving from theocracy to democracy historically has been a good thing for a period of time. But walk us through the happenings on the ground. And I know you're in America, so like your opinion is probably tied to people in Iran right now. I'm assuming you have contacts there still.
Absolutely. So as I said, my family is very involved in the resistance movement. I'm a big supporter of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is a group of 400 ethnic groups and religious groups in Iran represented on that that have a plan for how to transition the country from a theocracy to a democracy, and to have a free election, a secular country post this regime. So a lot of my intel and information comes from their connections in the country. They are very, very intertwined with the People's Mujahideen of Iran, who is the only entity that has consistently stood against the Iranian regime and struggled against the Iranian regime, and has organized resistance groups inside of Iran that are supporting the protesters right now and getting information out to the rest of the world to the best extent that they can, with everything that's happened and sort of the blackout that they've been under for 2 weeks now. We're approaching 2 weeks. So, so that resistance group has been feeding us information. The world right now is saying, oh, it's stopped. It's slowed down, right? It's come to a stop. The regime was able to stop it. The one thing that want the world to understand, and that the Iranian people are saying, is, first of all, this is not going to be a fast thing. What's happening in Iran? This is a sort of like, it comes in waves, it goes, it has its moments, it has its ups and downs. Revolutions shouldn't happen overnight, and if they do, there's repercussions for that in itself. And we've seen that happen around the world too. There needs to be organized resistance. There needs to be transition that comes into play. There needs to be leadership that rises up in the midst of this type of transition, that allows for the people to actually move from this type of repression that they're under right now to a transition government and to a free election. So the world is watching, and like everything else, we want this like to happen instantaneously. We've gotten so used to that being the case, and so much in what we see, and people kind of move on after like a 2 or 3 days of certain news. They're like, all right, it's over now. That is not what's happening around. We saw in 2022 that huge uprising that was led by many women that were being so courageous on the streets. This is a continuation of that same struggle, and I think the American people have to understand that there have been many uprisings in Iran over the years, and they have gotten increasingly defiant and increasingly bold in what they're doing. And this last one was very defiant and very bold. And the people of Iran are now paying a huge price for that. After the 2022 uprisings, thousands of people were executed on the streets in very public display to scare the people. And so that is now where the regime is headed. It is headed towards teaching everyone a lesson, making sure they understand that this is not to happen again. But the Iranian resistance remains strong. It has not gone away whatsoever. It is reorganizing itself and figuring out where the next and how the next sort of wave of protests and struggle will come forward. So that's where we are. Unfortunately, we have lost. The numbers are so all over the place. Officially, what we stand behind is 3,800 lives have been verified, have been lost, and the regime itself came out and said 20,000, which you got to say, well, I guess they're proud of that because their numbers are even higher than what the human rights community is saying across the world. But I think they're trying to make a point. And what's another scary layer to this is over 50,000 people have been taken into prison. And what happens to those 50,000 people now in the coming months, in the coming years, as they teach the people a lesson, and this sort of back and forth between the people rising and the regime repressing the people is what's really terrifying to see what's going to play out there, and what the regime intends to do with those 50,000 people that it has taken as political prisoners.
Yeah, a couple of very important things in that statement. Number one, revolutions shouldn't happen overnight. They're not sustainable. In this fast-paced, self-gratitude, instant gratification society we live in, we think it's a video game. We push a button, rulers are conquered, everything's fine, and everything moves on. You're right. That historically is proven. The other thing I think is important there is that the regime is the one claiming 20,000, which our media picked up immediately, right? So our media says, oh, the regime says 20,000. You're saying 3,800. First of all, one is too many.
Yeah.
I am very anti-war, very much anti-war, because all wars are fought for someone else's profit that isn't yours or mine. And when we see 20,000 be broadcast on news networks all over social media, that's obviously a scare tactic. It was 3,800. We'll call it 20,000. We'll put 50,000 in jail. It's kind of ironic that in your country, there are natural citizens who are Iranian that are protesting the government who are being thrown in jail. And we have the same thing happening here for a decade. And people are more concerned with what's happening in your country than their own. I find that to be very ironic on both sides of the political fence, by the way. So we live in very crazy times. So can you walk me through the oppression? You left in 79, and 79 was a big turning point. I mean, historically, a couple things I want to cover. The oppression in Iran, just get a feel for the boots on the ground, the people. It's obviously oppressive. Like, I think in this country, Zahra, one thing I'm trying to make clear on social media and on this podcast is multiple things can be true or false at the same time. Yeah. I can be very much against U.S. intervention in Iran, but I can also be very much against political leaders oppressing their people, right? I don't have to pick. I can be very much against the genocide in Gaza, and I can be very much not pro-Hamas, right? Like, things can be true at the same time. So walk us through the oppression in the region, because this is a much larger issue. For an Iranian, I could see that this is a national issue, but I think this is a total regional issue that exists out there. So walk us through how daily life changed with the color revolution in 79.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you 100%, Eric. This is a human issue. And the people of the world need to understand the implications of what happens in Iran will impact their lives. There's no doubt about it. Iran has enormous reach and power that most people are not aware of. They think of it as just yet another country in the Middle East, but it is a far greater power and has stood as the anti-West in the Middle East for 45 years. And that has a lot of significance and political clout that comes with it, and that has played that out for the last 45 years. So, domestically speaking, since 1979, what the Iranian regime did was it implemented the Sharia law, which is a distorted version of Islam. I see you have a cross behind your head, so you can understand how religion can be twisted and turned and used to
happening right now.
A group's advantage, right?
Yep.
And I'm Muslim and have nothing to do with Sharia law and Islamic fundamentalism that is being exerted on the people of Iran and around the world, frankly. So that came into play immediately after the revolution. There was a power vacuum during the revolution that allowed that theocracy to come into power. And then shortly after the revolution, even the people still thought they were going to have a free parliament election. There was going to be representation. There was going to be sort of a discussion around what laws would come into play and which ones wouldn't. That quickly went away, and the regime brought in Sharia law. Part of Sharia law is a huge part of it is the oppression of women specifically. Yeah. And so 50% of the Iranian population, which historically, by the way, is very educated, unlike a lot of the stereotypes that people have about Middle Eastern people, Iranian people are extremely educated, extremely connected. Women actually have more science and math degrees in Iran than men do. Right. So these sort of stereotypes don't exist in Iran, and they don't exist in a lot of the Middle East, but they don't exist in Iran. And so to sort of keep the population under control, the regime stripped the bodily and sort of autonomy of women in the country, bodily rights. And so the hijab became mandatory. Women had to have permission to do anything in society. Laws were sort of eroded around when young girls could be married off, what would happen to women in sort of what has happened in medical facilities, how they're treated, who can treat them, et cetera. All of these, all aspects of society, women have been severely oppressed for the last 45 years. And when you do something like that, what people who haven't lived under something like that don't realize, they're like, well, how's that even possible? Why are the men letting that happen? Right? Why are they participating in that? They must be bad people to allow that to happen to their women. It doesn't work like that. It's to your point earlier, it's much more complicated than that. And when you're trying to protect your family, because you saw what happened in 1979, and you saw how the regime came down hard on anyone who dissented after the revolution, your family's security and safety becomes number one. And so you just say, let's just stay out of trouble. Let's wear the hijab. Let's follow the laws, at least publicly, and privately in Iran, people don't live like that at all. But publicly, let's do those things. So that has been sort of the dynamics for the last 45 years. The other thing that has happened is the regime economically has mismanaged the country to the point where, as we know, what set off this last wave of protests on December 28th is the currency literally collapsed completely. This is that, as you mentioned, even with all the brutality of the previous Shah, it did have prosperity. It did have economic engine in it, right?
Tremendous resources in that country that were creating tremendous amounts of profit. Highly educated. You're right. Highly educated population, especially on the female side of the spectrum.
Yeah. So all of that should lead to a very when all those pieces come together, highly educated, lots of natural resources, should lead to prosperity for everyone. It has done the exact opposite because of the corruption of the regime. The people that are in the regime itself, the leadership in the regime, and the IRGC, the guards, the military that protects the regime, are so wealthy. You have so many billionaires now that have really reaped the resources of the country to rob the people of the resources and any opportunity in the country, have created bureaucracies that people just can't get through. The red tape you can't just to do anything in Iran. I mean, it's just notorious. It takes years to just get a permit to get anything. So economically, they have destroyed the country. In the rural areas, what most people in the West see is Tehran on TV. They see this a booming city, a very populated city. Even under the repression, it looks very lively and very much sort of prospering. But the rest of the country, which is the vast majority of the country, the rural and smaller cities in the country, economically have been taking, so many different types of burdens and hits, and sort of not reaping any of the benefits of what the regime has been using to profit for itself. So this has been going on for 45 years, has been getting increasingly worse. And the regime, the Western policies and what we're not aware of here, the policies that we implement here in the United States and in Europe, have a direct impact on whether or not the regime is able to gain more economic resources in order to oppress its people and oppress people around the world. And we can talk about that in just a minute. Then you have so that's what's happening inside the country. So it's from a personal civil rights perspective, it has been horrible. Executions, public executions, are a normal part of life in Iran. Political prisoners since 2022, with the last wave of uprisings, there's been a anti-executions hunger strike in all of the prisons across the country every Tuesday, and that has been happening now for, I think we're at 2.5 years, where they've been trying to bring more attention to the executions that have been happening to political prisoners in Iran. So this is the environment that the Iranian people are operating under on a daily basis. You can imagine why we saw the images that they were able to get out before the blackout, how defiant and how angry and how frustrated they are with the Iranian regime. On the other side of it, what the regime has done to maintain its power is what we were talking about earlier, which is it has become the anti-West entity in the Middle East. It has become sort of the hero for anyone who is oppressed in the Middle East. And it could be nothing further from the truth. Just like you said, the Iranian regime actually funds many of the groups that are causing havoc around the world. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all of these groups that we in the West oversimplify as like good or bad, try to put them on one side or the other. The Iranian regime is actually funding them, fueling those conflicts, and to further consolidate its power, and it has been doing that for 45 years. Hezbollah is essentially an extension of the Iranian regime. What happened in Syria and the meddling that happened with the regime there, that was the Iranian regime had a huge part in that also. So it has been doing that and sort of trying to position itself as the hero of the Middle East, the one that stands against imperialism in the Middle East, when in fact it itself is a dictatorship and uses brutal, violent tactics to gain control inside of Iran and outside of Iran. So the Iranian regime in the recent years has become increasingly weak because internally there's been so much strife and uprisings. And then externally, we know what has happened since what Israel has started to do in terms of taking out the different proxies that they have across the world. So it is weaker than it has ever been in its 45 years of existence right now.
Yeah, I mean, the Iranian regime has been a battering ram, a force for division and strife in a region that many high-ranking elites in the world prosper from. And I think people often look at Afghanistan totally wrong. The Afghanistani withdrawal, what it did was it opened up an oil pipeline from Iran directly to China to circumvent sanctions. So China has been getting Iranian oil basically at market cost with no interference since that withdrawal.
Yeah.
I also want to make it clear my stance, and this is just my opinion. We all have our own opinion on the world, and I love hearing everyone's opinion because no one knows what the hell is happening, Zahra. We have no clue on the grand scheme of things what is happening. Nations like this, where an intelligence agency orchestrates a color revolution, are never free nations. They are beholden to those who put them in power. So while we give so much credit to the Shah and all these other folks, they are beholden to those who put them in power. They are selected to be there. They are orchestrated and used as weapons in the region to create division, to protect the petrodollar, by the way. That really does protect the dollar in that area. And we oftentimes look at things through a silo. It's China versus the US, it's Iran versus Israel. These are all intelligence plays. My belief is, Zahra, and somebody who grew up in that type of world, the world is comprised of two types of people, cattle and ranchers. And I'm a cattle. I just understand that the ropes, that the fence around the ranch is made out of yarn. I can walk right through it and not pay attention to it whenever I want. I can leave the ranch. Most people don't realize that. So let's get into Israel, because this is where things are so nuanced in the world. You're talking about 1979, people think there. This goes back 50 years previous. You don't
Yeah.
just spawn off a revolution. You're talking about 50 years in preparation. So let's call it 100 years, right? Like 100 years in the making, and people listen to one side of a story or the other, and they make a decision. I'm on that team or I'm on that team.
Yeah.
I'm on Team America. That's my first priority. I'm American. I'm on Team God. So that's my first. My second is my family. My third is my country. And if we look at these things from that perspective, this 100 years, before 1948, that entire region was peaceful. Jews, Muslims, Christians all lived in relative peace, harmony, and prosperity. That extended in Iran through 1979. And now we have, tremendous Israeli influence. I think anyone's a fool if they believe that these executions of protesters, that Mossad didn't have a hand in that. I think you're a fool to believe that the Shah actually hates Netanyahu. Netanyahu also funded Hamas. These people all work together to confuse us so that we support whatever their agenda is to create freedom around the world. Right. Let's get into and I'm going to get into, I'm bringing on, as if you don't watch the show, you should. I try to bring different perspectives. So I'm actually bringing on an Israeli perspective on Iran, a free Iran perspective, and a leave Iran alone perspective, and let you decide where the perspective you should have lies, because in the end, that's all that matters, is what you think, if you're informed enough. So let's talk about Israel. Israel recently, there was a report, I think it was Scott Ritter, put out that a bunch of Israeli targets or intelligence operations had been destroyed within Iran. It is also the Jerusalem Post admitted that the Mossad was heavily behind the protests and the executions of protesters. And I would love to have your opinion, because you know boots on the ground, and I think that that's an important. We can't talk about Iran without talking about Israel, because the entire purpose of starting a war in Iran has Israeli benefit to it, because there wouldn't be a threat to them in the region any longer. So I want to get your point of view on Israel.
I think I
don't care what you say, by the way. So
I have to be able to get booked on other shows, but I will be always honest.
That is so sad that that's the reality. I appreciate that, but that is sad that that's the reality.
It is the reality, so I have to tread this line carefully. But for me, there's a truth in this that brings it all together. What you said earlier is exactly true. Israel stands to gain from. They stand to gain from the Shah coming to power in Iran. And right now in Israel, I actually was interviewed by an Israeli woman a few days ago, last week. Great interview. She really knew what she was talking about, called Ropes. And she could understand the nuances of this enough that she wasn't just presenting an Israeli position at all. She was presenting a very human position to this. Israel does stand to gain from having a puppet government in Iran that can be controlled and will therefore, all of these sort of proxies that Iran has in the region will cease to exist, right? Which has been the nemesis of the Israeli government for as long as it's been in power, really, but really
1948,
the Iranian regime came to power. It has really fueled that conflict even more, which unfortunately has led to the demise of the Palestinian people and what is happening to them. And as we said, Hamas is as a proxy of the Iranian regime, and in my perspective, is as responsible for what is happening to the Palestinian people as any other entity that is part of this conflict. So with that and thing, what is happening inside Iran right now is Israel is meddling in the protests. There's no doubt about that. A couple of days ago, there was a broadcast where they face and gave him an opportunity to speak. There's nobody else that could have pulled that up. The Israeli government to get through with a blackout in Iran, to have in the ground like that. They have, as we've seen with what they've been able to pull off in the last few years, the level of intelligence and access that they have around the Middle East is shocking, right? And it's very scary.
It shouldn't be shocking, because Iran is the only open, non-Israeli puppet leadership structure left in the Middle East. That's important to understand. You have your own bank also that's not controlled. So these are, before you get into this, it's important to understand, if you want to understand the reality of the world, study Muammar Gaddafi. What you're told and who he was are very drastically different things. So please continue.
They are. So they are meddling because they want to sway it in the direction that there's a puppet that comes into power after the regime's fall. They want the regime to fall. They also want to have the Shah be what replaces the regime. It's very important. And so do I think the Iranian people, one of the things you said, I just want to make sure we don't take away from what the actual Iranian people are doing. Yes, Israel is feeling the
Of course.
fire. Yes, it's instigating violence. Yes, it's, doing these things to get to its own objective. However, the Iranian people are also standing very courageously and very defiantly, and are willing to put their lives on the line right now in order to make sure that this regime falls. And I just want to make sure that we don't recognize the extent of that and what the Iranian people have to do right now to be where they are right now, and the courage that it takes to be there. So there is no doubt that Israel is. That is why we are also in the West seeing the Shah being pushed that the way that it is, in terms of the only viable option that could potentially follow the regime. Let's be very clear: the Iranian people kicked out the Shah in 1979. Now, unfortunately, the things that were at play at that time, the power vacuum that came about after the Shah, because of so many of the real leadership was imprisoned or killed because of the brutality from both the Shah and the regime that were fighting against each other, allowed for the regime to sort of come to power. But the Iranian people don't want the Shah. They kicked out the Shah. They don't want a theocracy. Why would they want to go from one form of a dictatorship to another form of a dictatorship? That doesn't even make sense. And on the streets, they're actually saying that. I say to people, take what you're hearing, the little bit that is getting through now, or that was getting through a couple of weeks ago, put it in Google Translate, hear it for yourself. Don't let somebody interpret it for you. They were saying down with the dictator, whether it be the Shah or the Sheikh, which is the leader of an Islamic group. So they don't want either of those options. They want a true secular government to follow this, and that's what they're fighting for. Unfortunately, as you said, the powers that be, including Israel, including the West right now, are trying to control the next chapter of the Iranians' story, and put a puppet in play there that they will financially and politically benefit from.
I think, first of all, thank you for walking through the nuances. That's the purpose of these interviews, is to get to the gray. Everything is black and white, right? Like, politicians are brilliant at this. So you can look at Ted Cruz or any of these right-wing guys. By the way, like, I'm a conservative, and I'm one of the few conservatives that's actually still beating on politicians to be honest, transparent, and fair, and speak the truth, which they don't do. There's no money in that. You can look at guys like Ted Cruz, any of them out there that, a year and a half ago, all we heard was, we need to bomb Iran because the whole country just chants death to America all day. That's all they do. And then now him and Mark Levin and all of these other supporters of Israel, staunch supporters of Israel, are now saying, oh, now we need to free the Iranian people. When you see these broad perspectives, all Iranians chant death to America. No, they're good people. We need to free them. There's an agenda behind that. And because they're they're duplicitous, speaking out of both sides of their mouth, like almost all world leaders do. Actually, not almost all world leaders do. When that happens, it's important to have conversations with folks like you, because walking through the nuance, and I'm glad to hear, I don't even know the show, but I would put it's called Ropes, where you have an Israeli, a Jewish Israeli supporter actually coming in and saying, this is more nuanced than you can possibly imagine, actually. And yes, there are absolutely brave Iranians who don't want to be under a theocratic, oppressive regime. Absolutely. But that's an opportunity for intelligence agencies to stoke fires. That's what they do. They foment revolution for change that they control. They want to control the existing regime and the next regime. And that's why the Shah's son is being propped up as the puppet, as the only possible replacement, because he'll create peace in the Middle East. Peace in the Middle East, from my understanding, from an American understanding, means Israel controls the Middle East. That's essentially what peace in the Middle East means from an American perspective. And that is not freedom. That is not.
No.
So the nuances of Iran are so heavy and so difficult and so hard for most people to understand. Even, I'm assuming you even have difficulty discerning and sorting through what's happening because the propaganda is so thick. Thank you for pointing out the obvious also. How did Iran get this, or how did Israel get this footage if there's a blackout? Like, people are not putting these pieces together. These are propaganda pieces. And the only way they
suddenly, right?
Yeah. Crystal clear footage too, by the way, 4K, brilliant, perfect sound. Do you believe the U.S. should intervene in this situation?
No, I do not. I don't. I think the Iranian people, and part of why they're propping up the Shah like this is because they want to make it feel like there has to be an intervention for the Iranian people to get to their next chapter. When in reality, there actually exists a organized resistance, as I mentioned earlier, in Iran that is more and more like as we are now in sort of a lower period of protest, they are reorganizing and supporting the people and making sure that they're getting the sort of resources and protections and all of that they need as much as they can within the country. So there's a little bit of reorganizing going on, but the resistance is very strong, and they're actually supported, as I said, by the NCRI, the People's Mujahideen of Iran, which has a 10-point plan that it's put forward in terms of what they believe the Iranian people are asking for in terms of human and civil rights and sort of the future of Iran and what it would look like. They have a plan for a 6-month transition period where they would put a provisionary government in place for those 6 months till they get to a free election for the parliament. And then that's when the NCRI's mission is fulfilled. So their mission is to get the people of Iran through that 6-month transitionary period and to a free election. And then they step aside. Now, a lot of Iranians, there's been a ton of propaganda, as you can imagine, because this is the only organized group against the Iranian regime that really wants true freedom and democracy for the people of Iran. You can imagine the amount of propaganda that's being fed to the Iranian people and to the world about NCRI's intention or NCRI's incompetence and all of that. Because if there's a viable option, all of these intentions that these powers that be have won't be fulfilled, right? So have to sort of create this, and so a lot, right? Like right now, what the propaganda inside Iran, which they're trying to sway the people with, is that look, the People's Mujahideen of Iran is siding with Israel, right? Nothing can be further from the truth. The People's Mujahideen of Iran does not want any interference, whether it be America, whether it be Israel. They want the Iranian people to fulfill their destiny. But that's the propaganda that's out there. So anything that has anything to do with the true sort of threat of what's happening within the country is being overridden by this type of propaganda and by these types of messages that will benefit those people that stand to gain from a puppet being in place and from the future of Iran being yet another dictatorship.
So well said. That is so well said. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, the best way to look at foreign issues and foreign conflict is to assume everything that you're hearing at large in scale is propaganda. This is nothing new. Please, everyone should read Confessions of, or listen to, if you don't have time to read it, listen to Confessions of an Economic Hitman. You'll understand why all this stuff really works. It's a base starting point. These are all operations. Global control has always been the goal of the devil. And it is his realm. So deception will be abound wherever you go. And these perspectives are very interesting to me. And what you're saying, Zahra, let me put it into American terms. Let's say, for instance, America happened to be under a theocracy where we gave power away to a religious group and they controlled with an iron fist, whether that's Christian, Muslim, Jew, doesn't matter, right? All three are on the table, by the way. This isn't like a mythology. This is actually what the Bible would say. However, if we were under that regime and we wanted to go back to a true democratic republic, because I don't think democracy is the right term, a democratic republic is the right term for this nation. The difference between a democracy and a republic is a constitution where mob can't rule. In the middle of this, we say, we want to be free and we're creating resistance and we're fighting back. Do we want foreign interference in that? Would you want Iranian influence that we need your government to save us? Because there's going to come with a trade-off. Nothing's free in this world. You help liberate someone, you're going to own a part of them. And that's just the way the world works. And there's no changing that. No one's, truly altruistic and said, let me free you and then totally let you go. I don't want any of your resources. I don't want any control. I don't want your vote at the UN or anything like that. I'm just going to come in, spend $1 trillion and free you with military power. I think it's very interesting to hear that you are very much against the regime right now and also very much against US intervention of any type, because that is the only way countries actually get free, is to do it on their own. And the struggle in Iran is, people talk about the conversations about Israel are 1,000 per day. There are 1,000 per day. The conversations about Iran are so small and few and far between that if you really, and I don't really claim to understand the Middle East, I understand it probably better than most. I was actually trained to hate people like you by Knights of Malta, who were the trainers who taught me that every every Muslim wants to kill me and behead me, which is, sort of in the Quran. There's also thousands of different iterations of the Quran, thousands of different, hundreds of different types of Muslims, just like there's 40,000 different types of Christians.
Yeah.
That
we
the world
see
is
you
so.
as part of our faith, actually. So, but go on, please. Yeah.
Well, that's a whole different discussion that's a whole different. I'm not going to get into the religious piece of this because I'll never buy into Islam ever. I know way too much.
Oh, we don't have to. That's the point.
Yeah, no, of course. No,
Yeah.
none are supporters because that's just the way life has always been on Earth. It's a very confusing place, and our souls are tested here, and that's a genuine take. But the nuance of understanding these things took me, I don't know, years and years and years to understand, because the propaganda, you live in America, so you're seeing the propaganda, right? All Muslims are the same. Well, then all Christians are the same, right? Like, if that's the statement you're going to make, where all Muslims are the same, then if all Muslim leaders are one way, then apparently all priests rape children, right? Like, if we're going to make the absolute assumption and categorize people and not look at the nuance to find the truth, then this is the path that we will go down. And it is a dangerous, dangerous road, because it's coming here. America is far more interested in foreign affairs, because that's what we're propagandized for, than we are our own. And as an American, I want to take the stance that you're taking as well. I support the people of Iran wanting to be freed from an oppressive regime. True. Absolutely true. I'm absolutely against spending a single dollar and wasting a single life or dropping a single bomb on that nation. It does not serve our interest in any way, shape, or form. I don't believe for 1 second that Iran has weapons of mass destruction that can reach our shore. And that's not just because Benjamin Netanyahu said it, which I don't believe a word he ever says. It's because it's just true. You don't have the resources or the funds to create that type of weapon. And if you did, we have countermeasures. So, like, we're pretty darn safe from Iran. Now, their proxies, on the other hand, these aren't Iranian proxies, as we've talked about here. These are intelligence proxies that are attributed to the Iranian regime. They're not really that powerful. They're powerful because of their partners. People forget that, right? It's the partners you have to get rid of. So what is the actual plan in Iran for the resistance to? It's a threefold process. Number one, you have to overthrow a regime, difficult to do. Number two, you have to create stability and a new form of government.
Yep.
Bless you. And number three, you have to figure out a way to make it all work and create prosperity. That would be the 3-point process from a strategic point of view. What is the agenda? What is the plan? If it's private, I don't want you to leak it on this little podcast, but how do the Iranian resistance plan on overthrowing a regime and then recreating a functional government and then creating prosperity for their people?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, this revolution is not going to happen overnight. It's going to come in waves, and it's going to each time be more powerful, more until that tipping point and the regime falls. And what usually happens in revolutions, and there's no way of predicting exactly what will be that moment and what it will look like in Iran, but is that the military and police abandon. Finally, the pressure gets too much on the streets, we've already seen that starting to happen. The people are actually fighting back physically and militarily against the government against the regime. So that's what makes this also recent wave much more distinct. In the past, it hasn't had that element attached to it. There has been military struggle against the Iranian regime, which the People's Majority of Iran partook in the 1980s and 1990s. But for the people actually participating in that military and that sort of more combative style of uprising, we're seeing that feeling on the street this time, where it's much more defiant, much more sort of they're clashing literally with each other on the street, not throwing something and then running, right, or saying something and then retreating, but rather just clashing and being willing to clash. So at some point, that usually leads to sort of the abandonment of the powers that be, and then it starts to be rather quick. Once that happens, then they can take control of the government offices, the government buildings. All of that will happen in some shape or form, and hopefully with the minimal loss of life from the people of Iran as all that plays out. But it has to play out. There's no way around that. That is what it takes to get to freedom and democracy. It's that there has to be that kind of struggle on the streets against the people, against the government that they're trying to topple. Anything other than that, you're robbing the Iranian people of that opportunity to create that self-determination, that sort of struggle that so many Americans take so much pride in here. Like, we stood up for ourselves. We had a revolution here. We can fault all these different things that we still have a lot to work on. But that moment defined Americans as what we are, right? Is that we became Americans in that moment. And Iranians need that to have true freedom and democracy, and the ability to establish a government that can govern them in that way going forward, and then create a secular government going forward. So that moment has to come. Then the people's majority. Now, again, I don't want to. This is the movement that I support, but I support the will of the Iranian people, and I think that's something that's really important to understand. If the Iranian people say, we don't want people's majority in Iran, we don't want NCRI, so be it. But we are the only group that has something organized to offer, right? So
Right.
let's hope in that moment that the Iranian people grab that and go with it, because it's a very well thought out sort of plan on how you transition a country, and within 6 months from that kind of chaos and violence and what it's been under for 45 years to being able to have a real free election. Right. So it has to happen fast. It has to be very organized. It has to be sort of make sure it has representation. That's why the NCRI already has representation from 485 groups, so that we can make sure that that's in play when the regime topples, that those groups are already represented and have a voice in what the elections look like and what the government starts to look like in Iran immediately after the revolution. So this was established in the early 1980s and has existed for 30 years as a group that has the only groups that are not allowed in the NCRI are any groups who want a dictatorship in Iran.
Sure.
Anyone who wants
that's an important point, Zahra. There are groups. This is another nuance to freeing other nations. There are people in those countries who absolutely want a theocracy and a dictatorship. There absolutely are. It's not every Iranian wants to be free and run a democracy. Not every Venezuelan wants to be Americanized. This is such a nuanced point that you bring up, and you validly put it in there. And that is your right as a free people to not let them in the group. Like, it is absolutely your right. Let the people decide. Let them debate. Let them prove themselves, and let the people of holistically the people of the country decide what type of government they want. This is a new experiment, by the way. We ran under monarchies, which are all theocracies, until around 1800. The whole world. And no one was free, and everyone was oppressed. So we have a Christian nationalist movement where we should have a Christian government. That's a theocracy. They didn't turn out well for 1,500 years for the individual, for the middle and lower class. They worked out really well for monarchs and for the papacy during that time, but not necessarily for the people.
And that is exactly what was happening in Iran up until 1979. And then it warped into this theocracy, right? That was a monarchy in that shape and form. That was, supposedly.
And there are Iranians who support it. There are Iranians who absolutely support the existing government.
Absolutely. And they have a right, just like in America, you have a right to believe what you believe. You have a right to say what you want to say. You have a right to write what you want to write. To, all of that, you have that right. And that would be that is what the Iranian people deserve and what they are after. Now, in order to transition into a democracy, these 485 groups will have a voice, will be able to sort of shape that transition, right? And then get us to the point where we have a free election. The NCRI, as I said, will then step aside and allow that election to happen. Now, whether or not one of the people say, well, the people's majority in Iran they want to be the next government. They will be probably a party. I would support them, right? But they're just a party in all of this. They are not yet another dictatorship. So if the people don't vote them in, if they run, which they have not indicated that they would, but if they run, right, I would fully support them. And so would all of us who have been supporting them for the last 45 years. So that is where we get to, and then the election happened, and then they draft the Constitution. And that's when they start to establish the laws based on that Constitution. Until they have elected officials in Parliament, you can't draft a Constitution because it doesn't want necessarily. So we have to get to that point. And then they draft the Constitution, and then the laws start to be sort of shaped and formed. So it's going to be a process. This is, as we said earlier, this is not going to happen, by March, we're not going to have a democracy in Iran, right?
Right.
That's not how this
Right.
works, right? This is, as even after they topple the regime, it's going to be complicated. This is a country that's lived under dictatorships for centuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be complicated. It's not going to be easy. But I believe in the 92 million people in Iran, and I have complete faith in their ability to pull this off. If we can just stay focused and not be divided by the powers that be, if we just stay focused on what we all want, which is freedom, then I think we can get there. But, there's a lot of interference right now and a lot of people that are trying to divide us and conquer us right now.
And that will only intensify after the regime falls, by the way. Infiltrators will be your biggest issue. It will be infiltration, not invasion, that dominates that market. I'm sorry, I giggled while you were saying that, because you said the 92,000 people of Iran, and at least you know that number. Ted Cruz doesn't. I forgot he was interviewed, and somebody asked him, how many people live in Iran? He said, I don't know, but you know everything about the country. You don't even know how I think it was Tucker Carlson said, you don't even know how many people live there. That is the American perspective. That is literally one of the biggest propagandists about us invading Iran, freeing Iran. We're going to free them and we're going to free everyone. It's like an Oprah show. Freedom for you. Just costs us a lot of money and a bunch of bombs.
I think on that point, just point out one thing too that's very unique, that you've seen a lot of countries that have been living under dictatorships. One of the first things those dictatorships do is tell them, stay home, worry about your family life, go have babies, right? Just go have a bunch of babies, right? So Iran did that in 1979, and people had babies, right? And now you have a populace where I think it was 70%, but now it's a little bit less. It's like closer to 60% now that is under the age of 40. So you have a very young, skewing population, right? And a huge, I don't want to give you wrong numbers, but a huge percentage of that is actually under the age of 30. So you have this generation coming up now with no opportunity, no hope, no future, right? So it's backfiring on the regime because they don't remember what happened in 1979. They don't have that fear inside of them. They're just like, I have nothing to lose and nothing to look forward to. And that is also something amazing that's driving this defiance in this mood in these current uprisings. Is you saw in 2022, the women are like, I'm done. Go ahead, take me. I'll take off my hijab. What are you going to do to me, right? That level of defiance comes from a generation that doesn't see a future unless they do this, and that's really backfired on the regime. Sorry, I just wanted to
that was amazing. There's nothing more dangerous than a population that has nothing to lose. There is nothing more inspiring than a people who have nothing to lose, and that's the problem in America, is that people have a lot to lose. And it's also the reason you're not finding that point, that one section of the electric fence that isn't electrified yet, is because that regime has made the security so wealthy. They have a lot to lose, and they have a lot to share, so they can pay off people to continue to oppress the people for a very long time. Same thing happened in Venezuela and other places. These are none of our business, though. They're none. That is an Iranian problem. That is a Venezuelan problem. Tired of intervening all the time while we have massive drug use on the street, and our American 30-year-olds feel the exact same way. We just have more. We do have more opportunity. That's obvious. We don't have to herd goats. We can still do something. But Zahra, this has been such an interesting conversation. I hope that people who listen to this actually hear that you can have dissenting views, and two things can be true or false at the same time. That is something we have just lost. It's kind of going to be my mantra for 2026. Two things can be true or false at the same time. Not everything is black and white. The world is far more nuanced than people can possibly conceive, because we've been taught the world is just black and white. If you want killings of children to stop in Gaza, all of a sudden you support terrorism. The terrorists weren't killing the kids in Gaza. That was a secular nation government that was doing it with military force. So how does that support terrorism? These mind games are dangerous here. They're even more dangerous in the Middle East. And I hope and pray for the resistance of the Iranian people, that they find a government that suits their needs. I hope and pray for that. And I also hope and pray that we stay the hell out of it. And I pray that we focus in on our own problems. And I pray that through all this, Iran actually does have a lot of sovereignty in the region, and people don't seem to understand that. They don't seem to get that Iran has its own bank. Iran has its own resources, and those are very valuable to other people. And I hope and pray that remains in place, and I hope and pray that everyone stays out of your fight and that you win it. I really do. I really do. And Zahra, thank you so much for joining us and being such a good guest. That you're like me, you're very unemotional. It's just factual stuff, base it in history. put it all together and let people decide for themselves. This is such a good opinion. I was a little nervous, to be honest with you, because when I looked at this, I said, when I first got your information, I was like, well, I read, like everyone, I'm as flawed and broken as any other human. I'm a sinner just like everyone else on planet Earth, and I judge.
Yeah.
And I read the first couple paragraphs and I was like, she's going to be all for U.S. intervention. And then I read a little further and I'm like, she's not. This is a voice that I want to hear, and I want people to hear that. So Zahra, final words, where can people follow you? How can they support you? Where can they keep in touch with you to get your balanced view on things?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, Eric, I want people militarily and economically to stay out of Iran, but in terms of support, please do support us. Please do stay aware of what is happening in Iran, because it's so important that the world witness what is happening in Iran. And that's the role that we can all play in the West, is really just be their witness and make sure that they know that we're watching, and that the Iranian regime knows that we're watching and the world is watching. So you can go to me personally. I'm not a big social media person, but my professional profile, you can find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, it keeps me straight. You can find me on LinkedIn, but in terms of where you can find more the truth and sort of footage, and without the voiceover and all of that you yourself can interpret and understand. And as I said, plug it into Google Translate if you want to know what they're saying. You can go to _policy. So that's one of the handles. And then the other one is NCRI, National Council Resistance of Iran. They have a website, they have a handle, they're all over social media. And they have, if you get the Farsi one, just keep digging one more notch down and you'll find the English one. So it's NCRI and then Iran_policy, that you'll find some really amazing footage coming out of the country as it becomes available, and just the truth of what's happening in the country.
Great approach. We don't want your military. We don't want your money. We just want your prayers. And I pray that people all around the world become free. The Bible doesn't say that, by the way. The Bible says it just gets worse and worse till Jesus returns. But
that's the thing we have in common.
Yeah. But if we can bridge the gap and provide people the opportunity to actually get closer to God, I think that's important. And you can't do that in oppressive regimes, especially under theocracies. You'll be led to a false light. It's not the true light. Theocracy is an enforcement of religious beliefs, ends up being a tool of the devil at all times. So Zahra, thank you so much for this balanced approach. Give her a follow, pay attention. I'm going to bring a couple other views on the podcast here in the coming weeks. I am looking for, and I've found a couple, but I'm talking to folks who have a very much pro-regime approach in Iran. They want the regime to stay in place. I want to talk to them. I want to talk to Israeli perspectives on what's happening in Iran from both, that we should have military intervention and install a puppet and not. And I want to get these perspectives out there and just lay down as much history as I possibly can, listen to as many voices as I possibly can. And outside of these 1-hour interviews, I want to focus in on actually making a difference in my own country and my own life and my children's life. So Zahra, thank you so much for joining us here today. God bless you. God bless this country. We'll see you next time here on The Rice Report. Have a good one, everybody.
Really appreciate the time. Thank you.